The Decision by C.P. Munro. Money is the root of all evils. It's the driving force that captivates our motives. It breathes through dishonesty and corruption. It buries itself in scandal. It multiplies in secrets. It exhausts our souls with torment and hatred. It defines lust and infidelity. It detonates and intertwines among the masses, and the decision will be made with controversy and malice. For some things are sacred. Some things money cannot buy. Chapter 1. A Chance of Opportunity. The alarm clock rang like a crack of thunder, disrupting Joseph from a peaceful sleep. He leaned over and with one hand turned the clock toward him, and then realized he was dreadfully late. With only minutes to spare, he splashed cold water onto his face, jumped into the clothes he had worn the day before, and downed a cup of bitter-tasting coffee. He looked at the kitchen clock above a stained 1940 calendar and panicked. He had so many things to do and so little time to do them. Time was of the essence, for he feared that he had procrastinated as long as he possibly could, and now his actions were being seen as damaging and caustic. He had received her final ultimatum, and so, in a desperate attempt to keep her, he decided to take the plunge toward a lasting commitment. He left his parents' dismal-looking home and approached his vehicle, his 1928 rust bucket, as he'd nicknamed it, rattling his keys with his attention focused on other, more pressing concerns. "What a piece of crap," he muttered to himself as he turned the key, and, as usual, all he got was the moaning and groaning of an engine ambivalent about getting started. "Damn this piece of junk," he shouted, slamming his hand on the dashboard. Finally, after what seemed like the 1,000th time, the old rust bucket turned itself over. He felt angry and wondered why life itself had taken a wrong turn for him. As far as he was concerned, he had next to nothing. He felt he had been robbed, for he lived in a depressing shack, drove a worn-out wreck, hadn't a dime in his pocket, and many nights he went to bed hungry. He knew he needed to snap out of this frame of mind and concentrate on more positive things, but he could barely think of anything else. Was it enough that he had a brain in his head, and from what the ladies in town had told him, exceptionally good looks? Off he went, tearing down the old dirt road, wondering if he had enough gas to get him where he was going. His thoughts shifted to the many things that had to be in place for Beth, a girl he had dated throughout his school days. He had bought a ring and contemplated when the perfect moment would be, and since her patience had finally come to an end, he came to the conclusion that sooner was better than later. Deep inside, he knew he wasn't feeling what he should be feeling, but Beth was a great gal, and he had known her for some time. He had convinced himself that the time was right, regardless of the way that he truly felt, and decided to ask for her hand in marriage that evening. They would announce their engagement at the Granville dance, which was scheduled for the following week. That was the plan, as he drove the pickup, enjoying the beautiful views the quaint little town had to offer. But at the last minute he decided to take another way, off the beaten track, which led to a more secluded area in the ritzy part of town. He felt he needed a change of scenery, and any change, regardless of how minimal it was, would do, for his life had become mundane and pathetically boring. He drove a short distance, and before long came upon what looked to be an abandoned lost soul. He slowed down and came to a halt, poking his head out the window. Before him stood a vision of absolute elegance. Who was this magnificent creature with her slender body, golden hair, and eyes the color of the Pacific Ocean? It was like a lightning bolt had struck him, and he stared at the beautiful girl. She approached his vehicle, smiling at him, and in a soft voice proceeded to express her dilemma. "Good afternoon. I seem to have a problem with my car. A flat tire of all things, would you believe? Could you kindly assist me? I absolutely detest getting dirty, and I know nothing about repairs," the elegant young lady asked. His heart was beating so fast he could feel a pulse along the side of his neck, and his forehead started to sweat as it always did when he was nervous. He felt a lump in his throat, another sign he was anxious. But keeping the gorgeous girl from ever knowing, he calmly answered her in a polite and confident voice. "Yes, I can see that, and it's more like a bad afternoon for you, isn't it?" She chuckled and then turned toward her automobile, a 1940 Delahaye 135 convertible, which appeared lopsided from the deflated tire. "Do you think you could help me?" she asked once again. That nervous feeling kept eating away at him as he admired her, but still he acted as if nothing was erupting inside, and once again answered her with confidence. "I think I could manage." He got out of his pickup, pulled some tools out of the back and the spare out of her trunk, and immediately started pumping up the back of her car. He loosened the flat tire and placed the spare in its place. All was fine and complete for the stunning beauty. But for some strange reason, she didn't hurry off to wherever it was she needed to be. They stood there, just short of smiling at each other. He observed she was dressed to the nines, and it was certainly obvious she must have had plans to attend some sort of function. But instead, she was standing there chatting with him. He loved the attention, but quivered at the thought of how he must have looked to her. He raised his hand to try to comb his hair in place with his fingers, but grimed his forehead with the tire dirt instead without knowing it. She giggled at the sight. What is she laughing at? He wondered, noticing his discomfort again. She wasn't going to tell him, though. "Do accept my gratitude. I don't know what I would have done out here in nowhere land," she said. He stood still for a moment and displayed concern and answered, "My pleasure. But I am curious as to why you're out here in nowhere land." She raised her eyebrows at him, and he worried he had come off a little harsh, scolding her as if he had the right to do any such thing. Nevertheless, she answered him, "I'm on my way to a polo match, and to be honest, I don't really feel like attending." "Well, don't," he applied swiftly, grinning. Again she chuckled, shaking her head as she answered, "Oh, it doesn't work that way. My family has many charity events we sponsor, and every once in a while I have to drag myself to them." His eyes fixated on her while he searched for the perfect comeback. "Well, maybe I could flatten all your tires and you'd have the perfect excuse," he said. He could see he was bringing out the sense of humor in her, because she laughed once again, as if considering the idea. "But how would I get home?" she questioned. He shrugged his shoulders, for it was all he could do to disguise the way he felt inside, his heart about to explode as he dared a suggestion. "I guess you'd have to hitch a ride." He knew he had grabbed her full attention as her smile continued to brighten her face, but this time something was different about her. His impression was that she looked smitten too. He searched for some indication that she was just as interested in him as he was in her. He tried to read her mind. What was she thinking? Why was she not leaving? And then she spoke. "Sounds so enticing," she teased. He felt she was now playing with him, sizing him up for some odd reason unknown to him, and the welcome windfall was she still hadn't left. He boldly moved toward her, and with a soft whisper close to her ear, he answered, "It was meant to." Joseph observed her intensely, hoping he hadn't been too forward. His eyes locked with hers as he seemingly came to his own conclusions, which were, she was just as intrigued as he was. "Rain check, okay?" she asked. He couldn't believe it. She wants a rain check. His anticipation soared, and his stomach lurched with the biggest butterfly it ever had. "Rain check for sure," he responded. "What is your name?" she asked. "My name is Joseph, Joseph Hall. And yours?" She looked directly at him and answered in an instant, "Margaret Williams." He took a few steps closer to her. "I bet your friends call you Maggie," he said. "They do, Mr. Hall. And what do your friends call you?" He hesitated for a moment. "Well, they don't call me Mr. Hall, that I can promise you," he answered. During their glorious introduction, an unnoticed dark cloud loomed over them, and suddenly out of nowhere, buckets of rain poured over them. Margaret raced in a tizzy to her car. She was literally drenched to the bone in seconds, an amusing sight for her mysterious friend. She felt his touch as he reached over and grasped her arm firmly, stopping her from the shelter she desperately needed. She looked up at him and saw something she had never seen before in any man, an intense passion fueled with lust. The rain poured onto her face as it did his, and her focus remained on him. For at that very moment she knew she had just met someone who would be a significant part of the rest of her life. She knew there would be no way she could meet her friends now, given the state of her appearance, and she started to laugh as Joseph reeled her in closer to him. The sound of his voice produced a sensation completely foreign to her. It was a moment she wished she could lock away forever. "The perfect excuse, my dear Maggie," he said. She quaked in anticipation of something she'd only longed for, as she replied, "Now that's some kind of faith for sure. My wish has come true, and only my friends call me Maggie, my dear Mr. Hall." She knew he found her irresistible, for he continued to stare, however impolitely, as he had been since he'd stopped his truck. "Ah, I see. Yes, of course. Miss Williams. Forgive my brazenness," he uttered. Joseph's instincts were on high alert. His dreams of meeting the opportunity of a lifetime were now bearing fruit as he observed the impeccably dressed woman driving an outrageously expensive car. He felt more emotion with this mysterious unknown than he had in all the years he had courted Beth. He now knew why he always felt like something was missing, because something was. Opportunity had finally arrived, and all it took was a drive down an unknown road where a beautiful woman stood in need of desperate help. He hoped his existence was about to change. The opportunity he had dreamed about for as long as he could remember, a mere chance that it would lead him into a world of extravagance and luxury. He noticed a change in her, as she seemed to be frowning. "What's the matter? You seem to be disappointed with something," he asked. "I have to go home and change. I don't suspect I'm going to make it to the polo match in time. Will you look at my dress? What a disaster." "Well, cheer up. You didn't want to go in the first place. Here, now, let me follow you home. I want to make sure you get there all right," he said. He studied her as she paused for a second, for his friendly gesture caught her off guard. "Oh, that's not necessary. You've already done enough for me. You fixed my car. You helped with the perfect excuse. I'm sure you must be busy," she implied. "No, I only have one more errand to run, and I don't have to do it today. Please, it would make me feel better knowing you're home safe." He waited for her response, and Margaret agreed. Then off they drove till they reached the magnificent Williams estate. As Joseph approached the huge black iron gates, it occurred to him how peculiar the wealthy were, the way they lived. Being enclosed in a barred-up compound to the average person was usually an indication that they were in prison. But the rich spent thousands of dollars in iron and metal, proudly placing the first letter of their surname on the arch above the entrance. Joseph and Maggie drove through the gates, up a slight hill on a paved road that seemed to lead to nowhere. Then suddenly, the forest disappeared, and the grand estate appeared, taking Joseph's breath away. This spectacular manor was even more impressive than he could have imagined, with its sweeping lawns, weeping willow trees, and enormous gardens. The front entrance resembled the stately grandeur of royalty, with two large pillars supporting the top balcony and a mahogany door fit for a king. It was mind-boggling for Joseph, to say the least, and he had only seen a portion. The time had come for him to say his goodbyes, but before he departed, he mischievously teased his Maggie once again. "Well, I guess I'll be on my way now, Maggie. It was a pleasure to have met you, I must say." He knew he had lit another spark underneath her. "Only my friends call me Maggie, Mr. Hall." "Oh, I'm your friend, your rain check friend. So I'll need your number. I plan on taking you up on your offer." His expectation was granted in an instant. He was holding the most optimistic part of his day, Margaret's phone number. He gave her a wink and drove around the circular driveway which led back to the gates and beyond to reality. To him, it felt like a wish come true as he daydreamed the entire way home. He couldn't believe his good fortune and thought he needed to pinch himself several times, for nothing like this had ever happened to him, and most likely would never happen again. This was definitely the opportunity he had visualized, and it was all wrapped up in elegant packaging. He arrived back at his home, a a depressing unlikeness to what he had just left. With each step, his mood changed dramatically, bringing on disdain for the things he had, and even more contempt, because he felt he deserved much more. While his imagination struggled with incredible hope, there was still unfinished business to attend to. Much needed privacy, and the time to think about what to say to Beth was all he was concentrating on. She would be heartbroken, but opportunity comes but once, and he was grabbing with all of his might. He curled up on his bed and put his hand on his right pocket, recovering the small box with Beth's ring. He stared at the box, and then, after the longest time, decided to open it. How happy this tiny ring would have made her. But he wouldn't be satisfied. And the opportunity story entered his mind for the third time that afternoon. He stood up and walked toward his dresser, opened the top drawer, and placed the box at the back, underneath some papers. There was something he needed to do. By abandoning Beth, the road of opportunity opened, as he freed himself from a life he had known as safe and simple for a long time, to be explored as risky and rich.